exclusive control now, but you may have a dispute in the future around who has lawful control in the future. For instance, your wife, in the case of a divorce, or there could be something after death with children. And in that particular case, you don't necessarily have exclusive control, and the judicial court will be able to basically, leverage their knowledge of the Wyoming digital laws and the limitations of this new space to basically say, hey, wait a second, this asset needs to be transferred to the new party, rather than the way it is right now, in which it's just, it's arbitrary. So again, I feel like being careful about transfer and even calling it transfer is questionable. I'd just rather see it be canceled voluntarily. And of course, the court should be able to say, wait a second, you put this under Wyoming law. Well, somebody's come to the court and said, this doesn't, this was unlawful, or it no longer is. It maybe was, but no longer is the lawful owner. So that's important, that the Chancery Court can determine legal owners after registration. Another area I'm really uncomfortable with in this draft legislation is direct registration by natural persons. As this is public data, the result is the Secretary of State would publish the personal information of a natural person. As you would likely only be registering valuable digital assets, there's a real history in the last 10 years of direct thefts against individuals holding them. Thus, you are publishing information that could lead to theft or extortion, et cetera, of parties that are natural persons that register. I'd really prefer something along the lines of the Wyoming registered agent model that is used for corporations over direct registration. This allows for the agent to protect the personal's privacy until such a time that it is needed by the courts for adjudication. So again, it's like, let's not reveal people's names and all that kind of stuff until we absolutely have to. I also believe that a registered agent is going to be able to better attest to the exclusive control of the assets and to the uniqueness of the identifier of the asset, because a steward understands that their role is as a steward, as an agent. I really want you to be careful there. I think there's other problems with non-Wyoming persons, in particular natural persons, to register, as their private information has now become entangled with privacy laws in other states or even other nations. I really would like to see Wyoming avoid this until your own privacy laws are updated. Similarly, in this particular legislation, as opposed to the Dow legislation, the requirement, I would like to avoid a requirement for public identifiers. It should be possible to have a private identifier. You're, as the agent, attesting, or as whoever is registering this is testing, that you can, in court, prove that this is an identifier. It should not necessarily have to be a public identifier. I am also concerned with the possible flood of registrations, as this happened with DNS registration of names, which is kind of a digital asset, right? And we've seen, DNS names worth millions of dollars. And we also saw a lot of problems with poaching of registration assets, attacks against digital, DNS holders by using fraudulent cancellations. This is another reason why I'd like to see this limited to qualified agent, because this is in effect what the DNS system does. In fact, there was just an auction for a bunch of silly top-level domains like .click and .Black Friday and all those things, as opposed to .com or whatever. And over $40 million were bid by the registrars to be able to offer those top-level domains. So, that's an example of a digital asset that has, millions of registrations, has all kinds of judicial things that are going on there. there is a possibility that this will happen for digital assets that are registered, especially if you lower those dollar limits. I'd also like to be clear that the law as written does not have the Secretary of State confirm exclusive control of the asset, or that the name of the asset is correct or its identifier is unique. I mean, they clearly have the ability to stop things if things look weird or whatever, but that's not their job, is to determine the truth of those, because these technologies are evolving and complicated. Instead, when a person registers a digital asset and wants the clarity of the Chancery Court, they will need to demonstrate those are true when they go to the Chancery Court. If these are later determined to be false statements, they then don't get access to the Chancery Court. You may want to consider offering greater clarity on the Secretary of State's role, that they don't have to be responsible to confirm these values. I think that's when this goes to adjudication. Again, remember, the primary purpose of this legislation is to offer clarity in the digital process, in the judicial process of digital assets. So that means that lawful owners and agents need to be able to accept process, right? I mean, that's the whole, what is digital clarity if you can't contact the party? Thus, another reason why I feel like some kind of registration of agents is required that also protects their privacy. There are some items in this legislation that implies future work for this committee. For instance, I'd like to see the term exclusive control and unique identifier to have better definitions. There are some good definitions in the 2018 law that are probably good enough for now, but we have emerging technologies of multi-sig wallets. There's baskets of digital assets, so maybe you don't have exclusive control over all of them, or maybe in the future going to be selling off fractional pieces. Pledged tokens, things of that nature. Having exclusive control and what is a unique identifier to make it such that it isn't done under Chancery Court type of precedent. Some guidance to them would be useful. Also, as this bill allows registered, as written, allows registered agents to be able to offer new services, I think there needs to be some updates to the Wyoming registered agent law, or even a new possible.
Chris,
almost done.
Chris, but with the future, those future legislative ideas, can you also email those to us?
Yes, I will. I will send this all to you.
Okay, thank you.
So I think there may need to be some updates. I'd really like to see maybe something that is a digital registered agent or something of that nature. Could be useful for DAOs, could be useful for other things. And why do I think that would be useful is they really need to be knowledgeable about digital assets in some fashion. And so, by them attesting in their statement to the Secretary of State that they have knowledge of it, they understand what exclusive control is, they understand what identifiers are, et cetera, and registering information for process, and that that they consent to audit and all these different types of things, I think is just really important in the longer term. I don't think it's necessarily today. I think you can just use the registered agent law, and I'd almost like to just see that now and not even have natural persons be allowed to register. If you really want people that are non-Wyoming persons, either individual or corporation, to register digital assets, I think you really have to be clear about a number of requirements and other application stuff to make sure that you can accept process and consent to audit and all of this. But I think it's, I would be happy again that we start with the 50K limit, that it's Wyoming registered digital agents, and keep it simple. And then later, if you want to make it more broad, this becomes incredibly valuable.
Hey, Chris, Representative Stith's got a question for you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Allen, thank you. Do you mind explaining, again, I guess, it sounds like you're saying that you would prefer that if the only people who are allowed to make these digital registrations are Wyoming registered agents. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I am not a Wyoming resident.
So, and Mr. Chairman, follow up. Mr. Chairman, so I guess these registered agents aren't going to do this for free, right? So wouldn't that create a sort of a chilling effect on doing this? And second, could you explain again why you believe that it's necessary? I mean, if the purpose of this whole statute is to define Wyoming as the jurisdiction for litigating ownership of the asset, which I think is the purpose of the statute, if I'm registering it, I'm doing it because I want to be in Wyoming. If I don't want to be in Wyoming, I wouldn't bother to register. So what's the value then of prohibiting the vice president of Nike in charge of NFTs from doing the registration? What's wrong with that?
We don't allow the president of Nike to register a corporation in Wyoming unless he has someone to be a registered agent who is a Wyoming citizen, who is able to handle process and things of that nature. So you're already kind of doing this with LLCs, which in effect is a kind of a, with DAO Act is now kind of a digital asset, et cetera. I feel like there is some useful limitations there. I think there's some useful friction. Remember, digital assets might be worth a dime, they might be worth $1 million. So, there's kind of a level here. I mean, I can buy a domain for $20, which is a kind of digital asset. And there is some, fairly complex things where somebody in Russia can go to an international court, and then it becomes this whole mess, and they can take that domain away from me. That $20 at least makes it a little bit more difficult than it is for other different types of things. We need Wyoming to be able to offer this clarity. I think it is a privilege to be able to have this clarity. And so we really want to be careful about it and steward it carefully. And I think, registered agents are one way to make sure that this is done properly. Also, from a digital perspective, having somebody who is not the holder make an attestation that, this party has demonstrated to me they have exclusive control, and I've been able to, identify that this asset does actually exist. Having that independent, kind of steward out there is really useful in this area that is so, questionable. It's kind of like, what was it? Somebody came along and registered Coca-Cola.com, even though they didn't have the trademark or any of that. And they said, oh, my father was named Coca-Cola. So, I'm allowed to do this. I think in the end, that started a whole giant process by which trademark domains could be done. Let's not repeat that mistake.
Did you have a follow-up, Representative Sith?
No, Mr. Chairman, my head's just starting to hurt, so I need to think about this. Okay. But
all right, very good. Committee, any other questions for Mr. Allen? You are going to email us your notes. Thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, let's jump back to the room. Testimony in the room, please. We are 10 minutes behind schedule. So please keep your comments brief.
Brendan's on the raising his hand.
Can everybody hear me?
Oh, Brendan, sorry, you don't have the floor. I've gone back to the room. I'll come back to you, okay?
I gotta go quick.
Surely.
All right, go ahead.
So my name is Pamela Norton. I'm the CEO and founder of Title Chain. We are a on-chain digital asset technology company here based in Wyoming. I'd like to thank Mr. Chairman and the committee for this opportunity to provide my testimony, to provide clarity to secure digital assets with property rights, credentialed by the Secretary of State of Wyoming. First, I'd like to present my actionable recommendations for consideration to the House bill. Thank you so much for all the work you've done. 23 LSO 0171, the Wyoming Digital Asset Act to the committee. Secondly, I'd like to recap the problem based upon current events that have unfolded this year, where so many innocent consumers, investors, developers, and employees are impacted by these centralized crypto schemes full of greed and shameless displays of scams that have impacted so many due to the poor risk management, a complete failure of corporate controls, and the high cost of legislative inaction. My recommendations today will focus on how we can mitigate this risk and increase adoption without excessive regulatory and oversight requirements to stifle innovation and market adoption. Thirdly, the goal of the recommended actions is to protect consumers, businesses, investors, and innovators so we can increase adoption to accelerate a decentralized Web3 ecosystem built on the principles of privacy, transparency, and freedom rather than surveillance, central control, and exploitation. I have spent years and I will continue to invest in educating the marketplace, investors, industries, government agencies, and members of Congress on everything from blockchain, crypto, privacy-preserving AI, sovereign identity, and innovative secure compute solutions. I provided my testimony this summer to the House Finance Committee with recommendations for immediate actions to mitigate cascading risks in the market and to the committee this past September. My recommendations today include the designation of a new digital asset entity issued by the Wyoming Secretary of State to be added to the draft bill. Wyoming can provide an immediate sense of assurance to the market by providing clarity of these entities that control title to these new digital assets, by recognizing property title rights to these registered assets credentialed into a business entity formation by the Secretary of State. The groundwork that has been drafted, the establishment of the Wyoming Registered Digital Asset to bridge the gap between intellectual property, NFTs, and other digital assets, currently lacks the clarity of the entity or entities that control such assets. My recommendation is a simulation project pilot with the Wyoming Secretary of State that will define a digital asset entity as a purchaser. I am requesting some additional language in Title 34, state property, title, conveyances, security, and digital asset transactions as language to be added to the current Title 34 as it stands today. Also, some additional definitions around a digital asset purchaser entity. And there's 5 different types of digital assets that can reside in that entity's wallet or wallets. And what that means is the keys, again, to the controlling usage or distribution of those assets. What we have to understand is that there is a new business entity that is operating today. And there is no state in the United States currently that recognizes a pure Web3 company. And what I mean by that, for example, is Rensa Games is here. They are a digital asset gaming company here in Wyoming. Their entire business model is using digital wallets, right? That's their entire business. We do not have an LLC entity or corporation. They are formed here. But I do believe there are businesses that they're not going to be a traditional LLC. You're going to have options where people can come in and say, I want to set up an LLC. I also will be holding digital assets. But you will also have a new entity that is solely just a digital asset LLC. Just as a DAO is a complete Web3 company. A traditional and decentralized financial world will only improve transparency and adoption when legislation supports a blockchain process that initiates proof of entity existence, proof of title, proof of audit, reserves, and custody to ensure legal contract and compliance and remedies that recognize digital asset title holder rights We must ensure the foundation of this new financial system is built on principles of privacy, transparency, trust, security, with absolute ownership control. My recommendations are, and I understand there are financial concerns because this is a financial impact, but what Tidal Chain and the group of our partners and companies that we support in this pilot project, we can actually mirror the existing system and all the current statutory requirements in the current system, working alongside with the Secretary of State. In that, there is no impact to the current system today by us mirroring. And what we do is we are going to then, based on the additions to this law that we are proposing to enact, we can simulate exactly how a new digital asset entity will be onboarded in the state of Wyoming. We will have the Wyoming State Secretary of State will actually have a node. We actually issue them a wallet, right? They're credentialed. There are credentialers and there are verifiers. We will have a Wyoming-based trust company. We will demonstrate the Speedies, certainly the digital asset banks here in Wyoming. We will have a certified public auditor that will be a credentialer. We can have a registered agent as a credentialer. We can have the court as a credentialer on the network. And we can also demonstrate how potential mediation could be a node on the network versus any of these cases filling up the docket for the Chancellery Court. We also partner up with the Global Legal Identifier Foundation that's based in Switzerland. They issue a 20-digit international code. So any entity that wants to set up here in Wyoming a digital asset LLC, LP, master LP, or series of LLCs can get credentialed with that 20-digit code to actually secure those assets in Wyoming. They will be stored, decentrally stored in Wyoming. Wyoming has two hyperscale companies here where more than enough data can be stored securely in Wyoming. So what I'm saying is that this new digital asset entity that has property title rights to the intellectual property of this entity, whether it's patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, can be secured and stored in an entity in Wyoming that becomes a taxable asset for the state. We also use a distributed identifier. We follow the W3 credentials. I know Representative Yin, it's a concern of mine as well as yours on self-sovereign identity. We also, these are my keys. This is a cold storage wallet. It's a bank card. This is the future where people will be verifying their credentials via a smartphone to do signatures in an authorized way. And we can also on the node do some pilot testing for the Wyoming stablecoin, again, showcasing how assets that are being deployed to the state can be managed. The real use cases that we recommend doing is the Truck Coin Swap, Rensa Games, VMXL, and Wyoming Hyperscale, as well as the Speedies, Custodia, and Bankwise. We also have some innovative IP that we will be also securing in the area of resilient clean water systems, as well as renewable energy. By moving those IP assets, we're in essence creating Wyoming becomes the new Ireland. So if you look at the process of what Ireland did in building and bringing a lot of high-tech companies to that country, I believe we can create that same opportunity with this type of new digital asset class. I know that was a lot. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it. But I think just kind of going back to timeline, budget, and so forth, we're obviously looking for sponsors to help sponsor us to deploy this simulation. We are also launching an event that we would like to be able to simulate to the world that we're bringing here to Wyoming. It's called the Capital Convergence on May 2nd through the 4th. So there's a lot to come out on that. But the goal would be how we're going to showcase to the world that this is how digital assets not only are secured in entities, credentialed, and how we can safely onboard these assets into regulated exchanges and marketplaces.
That is a lot, Ms. Norton, but thank
Thank
you
you.
for sharing all of it
Yes.
with us. Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, I understand we're running a little behind schedule, but I do want to just clarify what you're advocating for. It sounds like you're advocating for the creation of a new kind of legal entity that's not an LLC, that's not a DAO, but that would be a digital asset entity. Is that correct?
No, I apologize, that's not correct. We were going to take the current statutory, everything is the same for an LLC, LP, but that entity will be solely a digital asset entity. So it could be a digital asset LLC, a digital asset LP. So we're taking the current language that exists on the books, but we are just demonstrating how those entities are solely, really in essence, they're just solely software companies, right? Their entire business model is either using value, that's cryptocurrency type monies, but they're not in the fiat world, if that makes sense.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Norton, do you need any changes to Wyoming law to do what you've described?
No,
Okay, thank you.
yes,
That makes it really easy for
yes.
us. We like
Yes.
that.
Mr. Chairman.
Please, Senator Ruffus.
It's just a new revenue stream, a
I do
large new
think-
revenue stream.
I do think there are things, excuse me, I'm totally losing my voice now, that we probably need to build and build
And I'm
out
happy to, yeah.
facilitate. So we
Yeah.
appreciate the partnership on that. And I appreciate that statutorily we're in a good place. The other thing I'll note, which you're probably familiar with, but the sandbox program we have honestly facilitates everything you said, where you'd have an
Yep.
opportunity to engage in business modeling, working with the Secretary of State's office. So I think we have a lot of tools, and let's continue the relationship, work together, and figure out how to build out this prototype and some proof of practices. And obviously, some of the folks that we've been working with are expert in this area too, and there's a lot of enthusiasm behind supporting that type of a build out. So thank you for
Great.
being here and
Thank you.
presenting. And well, before you leave though, if we do move forward on this Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act, is there anything that you see particularly pluses, minuses, things that we might want to change that would help to facilitate some of your interests?
If we could just add language that the assets can actually reside in an entity. There's no entity right now. So if we just add language saying
Okay.
these assets could reside in an LLC, LP.
They can,
We
and
were
I don't
talking
know
about
why anyone interpreted it otherwise. And unless David corrects me, an LLC could be the owner of any of these assets that's registered as we drafted this. Is that not accurate, David? That's correct.
Mr.
Yeah.
Hopkinson?
So even though it's not, I mean, it's
Giving us a
not,
thumbs up for the
it's-
record.
it's not loudly explicit, but consistent with our drafting,
Right.
it's true.
Right,
Yep.
right.
So I think we're good then. All right, thank
Yep.
you.
Thanks.
Other public comment in the room? Mr. Pope?
Mr. Chairman, David Pope, I'm a CPA, and I am testifying as an individual, and I am licensed here in Wyoming and in Colorado. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stith, or Representative Stith, I would advocate for a different type of registered token entity, but that's not what I'm here to talk about right now. So first off, I am in favor of the legislation as it stands. I think there have been some great ideas presented as far as changes to the specific wording. But one of the things that I noticed is that in the Wyoming Registered Agent Act 1728-101, the definition of a commercial registered agent is one that is a registered agent for more than 10 entities. I think what we have to address here is that we would want that same sort of regulatory framework for a registered agent that is the registered agent for more than 10 digital assets as well. So we would have, in order to keep the registered agent language in there, I think we would have to amend 1728-101 to state that more than 10 entities, digital assets, or combination thereof. I think that's a simple change that if you require registered agents to be involved, you would need that language as well. And to summarize the whole registered agent discussion, I would say if you're going to have a digital asset is far different from a trademark in that a trademark has basically form and content, whereas a digital asset has form, content, and rights associated with it. Therefore, if those rights are going to be adjudicated in Wyoming, you need an agent for service and process in Wyoming. So that's my entire argument for having a registered agent be at least enabled. If an individual owner or an entity owner wants their information and the information that they own these assets broadcast to the world through the Secretary of State's office, that's up to them, and then you can go directly to the owner for service and process. But if they want privacy as well, then they need a registered agent function within Wyoming, and the registered agent needs to be required to have all of the same information that you describe in here, plus be under the regulatory framework of the Secretary of State's office. And those are my only comments on this. I think this is absolutely wonderful legislation. I think it takes Wyoming one step forward and one step closer to the goal of having that type of registered digital asset entity that I've been advocating for so long. And that's really all I have to say.
So this is just what you and I were trying to get at, where we see a lot of different issues related to registered agent and objectives that it would accomplish and challenges that it creates. Our LLCs, our corporations already have registered agents. And what about the possibility of having this avail itself to, in other words, you can register if you are a Wyoming resident, whether that's a Wyoming resident person or a Wyoming resident business. Those are the only eligible entities for registration. It doesn't hold anybody back, because it just means that if you're out of state, what do you have to do? You have to register a corporate structure, LLC, then the LLC becomes the owner. It's going to have a registered agent. Due process comes into play as far as how you get to the individual, if you have a process of service, whatever the case may be. And if you're a Wyoming resident, we should be able to find you too. Just an idea, trying to capture, what we heard from the Secretary of State's office is if we start going down the path of registered agent, we have a lot more work to do. This bill's not ready. If we cross off registered agent, this bill's ready. So I want to cross off registered agent. But we do leave open some of the concerns that Mr. Allen and you have raised, and we can revisit it later too, certainly. But any thoughts on that idea? And I don't know whether that's the way we go, but I'm just trying to find a solution that threads the needle.
Mr. Cole?
Certainly creating an eligible ownership person would may be easier in this. You would have to define that within the bill.
Yeah.
But you could, a Wyoming person of really any sort would be, that would be easy. It would be easier than requiring a registered agent. And indirectly, it would require a registered agent relationship, because it would have to be an entity with an address here. That registered agent, of course, would be subject to the regulatory framework that the Secretary of State's office already has in place. And it would allow for that agent to accept service and process.
That might be the solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Pope. Other public comment in the room? Other public comment in the room? Brendan, you're up, and if you keep it to less than 3 minutes, we might pass this bill before lunch.
Breathe. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'll try not to get in trouble. My name is Brendan Marr. I'm an MIT Media Laboratory alumnus. I'm on the working groups for digital identity and this bill here. I'll get to the point. When we were looking at the registered digital asset bill, the background is that we wanted to, most importantly, ease the burden on the Secretary of State and the registered agents. I think the most important thing, I wholeheartedly support this bill. I want to avoid a potential train wreck for Wyoming. And I agree with what has been said by Mr. Pope and Christopher Allen. The train wreck is if we don't have the language regarding a commercial registered agent. And I do think that the proposal by Senator Rothfuss is brilliant because it negates that. I also secondarily believe that it is important to have a high bar for this. I think the number was thrown around $50,000. It could be less than that, but I do think it's important for the reason being that we do not want to muddle this legislation up with the legislation that we're invariably going to have to pass in the future regarding other types of registered digital assets around identity in the future and contracts. At some point, we are going to need a specific registered digital identity legislation act on specifically registering contracts, because at the end of the day, NFTs are a bundle of rights, but we need to have a way of specifically resolving the issues pertaining to that. And in terms of revenue, that's, we talked about, 2 point whatever billion in my hypothetical case around digital identity. If you had $1 for each contract that was, that people would register, that would be a tremendous income. And people certainly would want to peg their contracts to Wyoming. I have specific language regarding the Romanettes that I think will give clarity regarding control if the committee would like to hear that at this time. I'll take questions as well.
Committee, questions for Mr. Mayor? All right, we do appreciate your testimony. But yeah, go ahead and can you send us that language?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. All right, any other public comment online, in the room? Committee, what is your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Okay, it's been moved by Senator Rothfuss and seconded by Senator Cost. We do have some amendments. Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the concept that I'll amend towards is removing the registered agent language, all of it, and making it so that only a Wyoming person can,
Wyoming resident.
Wyoming resident. Basically, I want a natural person or corporation. So don't we call that a Wyoming person in statute?
A person does include a corporation in statute, yes.
Clark has a concern.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just to clarify the motion that a Wyoming resident, only a Wyoming resident can do what?
Oh, my apologies. Can make a registration of a digital asset. So in other words, they'll need to, if they're from out of state, they'll need to register an LLC in Wyoming, and then that LLC will be able to do registrations just fine. So that solves the need for a registered agent if you're a corporation. Or if you are a natural person in Wyoming, you would be eligible.
Well, you could be, it's a little complicated. You could be a Wyoming LLC, but not have a Wyoming address.
That is
Because
correct.
you're using a registered agent.
That is correct.
And that would be,
And that's fine too.
and that would be fine too. Okay.
Yep. So that's, and I, before we start amending towards that, let's maybe discuss that and see if everyone's okay with that concept. Again, it's to try and represent, there are some good interests in, all right, well, we would want to be able to contact this entity, we'd want to have access to information about them, and if it's not somehow tied to Wyoming, then we've got this registration on file and we have no way to follow up with anybody associated with it. So how do we provide that interaction? Well, we do it right now with corporations through our registration, our registered agent process. So we have Wyoming domiciled corporations, LLCs, et cetera, that have registered agents already. We have a process in place. We can piggyback off of that process, and it accomplishes all of the objectives of non-Wyoming resident entities doing registration. So we have a vehicle there. And then if it is a natural Wyoming person, then they're a citizen of Wyoming, we can find them. I think that covers everything.
Representative Stiff?
Mr. Chairman, so are there two parts to your motion? The first part is to delete the language concerning registered agents in the current draft. And the second part of your motion is to then require that the applicant be a Wyoming resident.
That is accurate.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
That motion is formally made by Senator Rothfuss, and it was seconded by Senator Cost.
Mr. Chairman,
Additional discussion? Yes.
I move to divide the amendment
Okay, you
so
want
that Division 1 is to
delete the registered?
delete the registered agent, and Division 2 is the
You don't have-
requirement with the Wyoming
You don't have to
resident.
move, just say, yeah, let's do it. Okay, so let's start off with removing all reference to a,
Okay. All those,
Registered agent.
all those in favor of the motion to remove references to registered agents signify by raising your hand. Okay, all those opposed? Okay, that motion does carry. So now you want to discuss the second one? Representative Sith?
And Mr. Chairman, I'd be against Division 2.
No way.
Just because I think that if we say to Nike and Coca-Cola that they can't register a digital asset in Wyoming unless they also form a separate LLC, I think the result of that will be they just won't do it. And we'll have many, this legislation will be far less
You don't think Nike would
impactful.
just pay $100, $102 to form an LLC online?
Mr. Chairman, if I understand it, the motivation to register a digital asset is because you want Wyoming to be the venue for disputes about ownership. And so if that's your motivation, then I don't think it seems that we don't need them to form a separate company in Wyoming because they will have to identify who they are when they do the application.
Let me ask you this, Representative. Do you think that Nike would not already have the digital asset inside of some type of organizational structure, probably an LLC?
Which LLC is probably a Delaware LLC.
Yeah.
So I just don't think we need to have that additional burden, regulatory burden on them. To me, it's simpler just to let any person who's actually owns a digital asset to register them in Wyoming if that person so chooses, regardless of where they are in the world.
Senator Rothfuss?
Mr. Chairman, I think it works when it works and then doesn't when it doesn't, and that's the concern. Your example of Nike, where they provide sufficient detail to call them, that's great. But now you've got Joe Smith in Mozambique sending his registration and well, all right, we can do Nigeria if you'd like. And you have there's no callback potential. What do you do if there's a service of process? This is something we've struggled with for the entire time we've had corporations, and we built our registered agent, I mean, which still has flaws, right? It's an imperfect system, but at least we spent however many decades building a system that has some checks and reviews and you know, there's a process there to provide some integrity and some confidence. And the motion to try and use that process is just so that we have the consumer protection there. I don't disagree that I would like to have a system that just allows Nike to push a button and register because we'll find them. And maybe there's if there's an alternative solution that achieves your interests, I like your interests, they're better than mine, right? I want yours, but I don't see how to get it and have any consumer protection in place. That seems long, Hannah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just if we step back and look at first principles about what Wyoming is doing in this industry, we're trying to create an enabling regulatory environment for the good guys while keeping out the criminals and fraudsters, which is, again, Senator Lummis's statement was so spot on. If our approach to the regulation had been in place nationally, boy, a lot of really bad things would have been prevented, right? And so the concept here is that we're not trying to create a platform, the state of Wyoming, trying to create a platform for just anybody to come in, because we're trying to green light the lit part of the market, right? And so the concept here, if we think about first principles, is that the systems of the state of Wyoming are giving some imprimatur, and therefore the people who are willing to register, right? It's the concept of the DAOs, right? If you're willing to register and you come in here and you tell us who your control person is, your person who's responsible for taking service of process, then you can get registered here. And so I think that first principle is hopefully helpful to guide. I know I'm a non-voting member of the committee, but yeah, thanks.
Joel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would want to build on those prior comments and reference what we've done with I'm oversimplifying here, but with the treatment of digital assets under the prior statutes that have been passed, which is that digital assets are treated under Wyoming law if the owner of the digital asset is a Wyoming resident, a Wyoming LLC, or the asset is held in custody by a Wyoming custodian. I don't think it would be inconsistent to kind of draw a parallel here where you're either a Wyoming resident, it's a Wyoming LLC, or registered with the Wyoming registered agent or something along those lines.
Representative Sif?
Well, Mr. Chairman, those are all fair points, and it's probably more prudent to adopt this Division 2 of the motion, that it seems like it is a safer route to go. And then if it turns out that it has an incredible chilling effect on the whole process, then you could change it later.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And to follow up on that, and there's nothing that'll stop us from trying to think of better ways to do it, between now and the end of the session, if we can come up with a way to capture your interests well and still provide the protections, then I'm in.
Okay.
David, do you understand the motion? And feel free to work with the language, but it's the concept that you'd be a Wyoming person, a Wyoming resident, which includes corporations and natural persons. So however, we appropriately need to structure that so that it gets that point across.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion does carry. We have some additional amendments.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. The jurisdiction? The $50,000?
Yeah, the $50,000 was the amendment I was looking for. There it is. It's on page 13.
Okay.
Lines 5 through 7 strike. The monetary threshold set forth in this subsection shall not apply to actions brought under this paragraph. All that does is then reinstate that the Chancery Court has a $50,000 threshold. That's my motion, is to strike that sentence on lines 5 through 7.
Okay. Seconded by Senator Cost. This one's fairly straightforward. Does everyone understand the motion? Any discussion on the motion? you have a discussion? Yeah, go ahead. Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question would be, realizing that it's a threshold of the Chancery, and do we feel that's too high? I mean, or is that a reasonable
I
question?
think it's pretty reasonable because we're talking about a digital asset. If somebody really wanted to be in the Chancery Court, they would just make the claim that, I mean, they're self-evaluating the value of, and that's not going to be litigated where you're going to have to prove that it's worth necessarily. It could be litigated, I suppose, but I don't think that's our small claims level.
Question or motion?
Question on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that motion does carry.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss.
So Mr. Allen's point on page 9.
Yes.
This is the 3429-206, the transfer of registration assignment certainly does imply that that is a transfer of ownership. I think the attestation of a cancellation and re-registration is the right way to do it because we don't have any mechanism for a continuous attestation of truth that it hasn't been registered somewhere else. It's only that moment where you make an attestation. And so the transfer, I think conceptually fails. So there's two ways to do it. One would be we'd have to have some sort of a monitored attestation that continuously means it's true that you have the digital asset, you're the owner, and you've got it registered in the state of Wyoming, or that your attestation only has to be true at that moment. So based on that analysis and Mr. Allen's argument, I tend to agree that our best approach is to fully delete 3429-206. I don't think there's anything there that we need because you have the opportunity to renew or the opportunity to terminate and the opportunity to register. So a transfer is only a convenience, right? You can do everything through those alternative steps that you would need to do. So my motion is to delete on page 9, 3429-206.
Okay, that's been moved and it has been seconded by Senator Furphy. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman,
Discussion?
sorry to be slow here, but in the trademark context, we allow for the assignment of the trademark, and typically that happens in connection with a separate transaction where someone's actually, providing value for that assignment. So I thought the current language was more similar to how trademarks are handled. So why doesn't this work? I mean, what's the problem that we solve by deleting this?
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm not, we can get Deputy Wheeler back up here as well, but when you register a trademark with the state of Wyoming, it's okay to have a trademark registered elsewhere. You can register in multiple states, the trademark, and you basically have that when you're within jurisdiction, you've got rights to it. With this, you have an attestation that you don't have it registered anywhere else, and we have no provision to police that. And it might even change, right? The moment that you sign the attestation that I have registered this in Wyoming, I own this, those are true statements. And then an hour later, I sell it and somebody else registers it in a state to the east if they come up with similar legislation. We don't check that, we don't police it, we don't have any provision for enforcing it. And that's okay as long as the only thing that you have in place is that attestation was true at the time. And if somebody comes up with a newer attestation to battle it in court and say, that's okay too, right? It works itself out. But the transfer doesn't have a new attestation, and it seems to imply the continuity of ownership that I actually am the owner. None of that's checked. So I do see the problem, and this was what Mr. Allen raised, was that concern that for this, a termination or even a new registration with attestation is what needs to be done. And I mean, you could have a single form, which is called a transfer form, which is a termination and new attestation. That's fine too. I mean, that's effectively the same thing, but this isn't structured to provide a continuous attestation of ownership. That's the concern that I have. Maybe that never plays into the game, but honestly, with the way people prosecute on trademarks and intellectual property, it seems like just exactly the kind of thing people would freak out about. So that's the reason.
Okay. Further discussion on this motion? Question on the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, that motion's been adopted. Any other motions? Did you want to play with that agent language? Because that wasn't taken care of in your first.
So I was going to ask about that. Do we want to delete or agent everywhere and recognize that agency exists or not? I'd ask you guys. You're the attorney.
Representative Stith was comfortable with it,
Yeah.
unless his opinion's changed. And it has not. Let's just leave it alone.
I'm fine with that, certainly for now.
Okay.
That was all I think I had.
Any other amendments? Any other amendments? Discussion? Question on the bill? Emily, do a roll call on the bill, please.
This is a roll call vote to sponsor 23 LSO 0171 Wyoming Digital Registration Act as amended. Senator Furphy?
Aye.
Senator Cost?
Aye.
Senator Nethercott excused. Representative Stith?
Aye.
Representative Western?
Aye.
Representative Yin?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss?
Aye.
Chairman Olson?
Aye.
That passes.
Perfect.
Great
All right.
work on that, everyone,
Good
really.
job, committee. That's a big lift, Bill.
Yeah,
That's a
thank you,
big
everyone.
deal. So we did move through it pretty quickly, and I apologize for that, but I feel really comfortable with where we're at, and we know that we'll always have the opportunity to revisit and then definitely work it through the session as we're working it. With that, I'd like to break for lunch. We'll come back at 12:35. Try Jimmy John's, they're freaky fast. We will take up insurance amendments at 12:35. So please be back. I would like to start on time, so I'm not even going to leave because I'm the one that will throw it off.
Right. And for those that weren't here, there's a lot of folks that need to travel at the end of the day. Obviously, weather's awful, so we're trying to get this done quickly and get people out of the room.
Yep.
Sorry for the short lunch. I'm always opposed to short lunches, but this time I generally agree.
Yeah, we built the long lunch into the agenda.
It's part of the